Sidonie Smith, and I am the incoming coordinator of the Adult Faith Formation Working Group. And thank you, but I do want us to give a nice round of applause to Jane Dutton, who has done a fabulous job for the last 3 years. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. So it's my pleasure to be the host for this first of 3 conversations about immigration, immigrants, and refugees, and what's going on in the country. We gathered this under the rubric Sharing Our Land, and in prelude to that, I want to just acknowledge that we are on land that was shared with us and not shared with us at the same time. And so I want to say just a little bit about that. We are on the land of the 3 fires, the Bodawanimi, sorry, I just had cataract surgery, and so I can no longer see close up. Sorry about that. The people of the 3 fires, collectively named the Anishinaabe, lived in lands and the waterways of the Michigamme before the first white settlers arrived here, and they continue to live here still. The University of Michigan owes its creation to them, and therefore the town of Ann Arbor also owes its existence to them. So I hope that we will remember that the history of sharing land in this country is a long and complicated one, and much of it very violent, as are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so today we are so lucky to have Bill Lopez with us. He is Dr. William Lopez, and he is clinical associate professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. He is also a faculty associate in the Latina Studies program. His first book, entitled Separated, you see it here, Family and Community in the Aftermath of an Immigration Raid, examines the lasting damage done by a November 2013 immigration enforcement raid by ICE and local police in Washtenaw County. In Separated, Bill puts faces and names to the numbers behind deportation statistics and urges readers to move beyond sound bites to consider the human experience of mixed status communities in the small towns that dot the interior of the United States. For this book, Bill won the Mariposa Award for Best First Book of Nonfiction at the 2020 International Latino Book Awards. This year, he has been speaking about his just published follow-up, Raiding the Heartland, an American Story of Deportation and Resistance. In addition to his academic, and he will be talking on that today. In addition to his academic research on the public health impacts of deportation, Dr. Lopez regularly contributes to public discussions on deportation, diversity, and Latino culture in venues such as the Washington Post, CNN, and the Detroit Free Press. He is on the board of Health in Partnership and the Latino newsletter. And in his spare time, when he's not teaching and writing, he likes to run, read, listen to musicals, and attend his kids' choir and sporting events. So please join me in welcoming Bill to our place.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. There's nowhere else I'd rather be to spend the morning, a Sunday morning, with you all. I want to start by calling to mind, as we know, something that just recently happened. So I'd like you to put your head and your heart with me and think of the killing of Renee Nicole Good, who was killed in Minneapolis this month. I believe earlier this week, she was killed by an ICE agent, mother of 3 in her community. So let's just take a moment of silence to commemorate her life. And as we get started, I actually want to call to mind another killing that happened 5.5 years prior to Renee Nicole Good's. George Floyd was killed by a police officer, Derek Chauvin, less than a mile from where Nicole was killed. These 2 deaths teach us a number of things. One is that law enforcement interactions often end in violence. George Floyd was a father of 5. The second thing they teach us, as I'll talk extensively about today, is that law enforcement violence, whether it's policing, whether it's incarceration, or whether it's deportation, it's really about the separating of families, right? Our communities are made up of families, and these families are separated by various types of law enforcement. So I want to put ourselves in the right head and heart space as we think about these 2 killings. We take serious the role and discussion we have today, but we also know that working against these systems is a long and tumultuous and challenging uphill struggle, and that it takes many things. It certainly takes seriousness, but it also takes love, community, working together, and sometimes even a little bit of humor. We keep all those in mind as we join each other today. So to get started again, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for inviting me to your beautiful building that had not 1 but 2 open parking spots. When I drove in, I heard that was a very hard thing to accomplish. So hello to all the people in the room. Hello to people watching online as well. If you have any questions, you can feel free to raise your hands at any time. I'll answer the question then, or if I'm going to answer it later in the presentation, I'll do so. Or if it's part of a bigger discussion, I'll push it off then too. But feel free whenever you want your hands to go up. I have 167 undergrads right now. I have 67 master's students, and I have 48 online students. And I have 2 kids, 2 teenagers. So I should poll you all to see which you think is the hardest of those 4 groups to manage. So we got a couple of votes for teenagers, and I would not. So I'm open and happy to have whatever questions you want. I want to talk about my books, but also I'm very aware of the changing immigration landscape that we see today, right? We are in historic, unprecedented moment. One of the ways I like to describe it is we are in an unprecedented moment that has lots of precedent, right? So let's think about what that precedent is. So Dr. William Lopez, I'm a faculty in the School of Public Health, and I come into my immigration work with this public health lens. What does it mean to have a public health lens? Often when we think about public health, we think about the epidemic, right? We think of disease spread. But public health is all about population health, and the word health is often far beyond just our bodies, far beyond disease, and far beyond what spreads biologically, right, pathogenetically. Health is, in order to achieve health, we need a few things. We need to be able to be with people we love, among them, right? Public health research and our own lived experience says it's hard to be healthy if we can't be with family and community. So my work on immigration and deportation really considers how do we stay healthy when there is this deportation regime or deportation agenda whose goal it is essentially, as we started, to separate families and to fragment communities. Now, no matter, I like to bring this up too, no matter what you believe about immigration, no matter who you voted for, and no matter what you believe about the president and ICE, we still are concerned with the impacts of these policies. If you smoke, you still care about the health impacts of cigarettes, right? It does not, on the front, it does not matter where you land. We always care about the impacts of the policies, whether we support them or whether we don't. My views are particularly clear. My views align with the public health view. You can read all about them in the book too. But no matter how wherever you land, We care about the outcomes of the things we support or we don't, right? So we care about what happens. I separated, as was mentioned, as about a home raid that took place 7 miles from where you are. So this was very, very close. And as I followed the impact of that home raid, what I first thought I would do was follow the individual who was deported. And in the book, I call him Santiago. I don't use real names today. So Santiago was deported in a home raid in 2013. And when he was deported, I planned to go visit him in Mexico. And I asked his family about this, and his family said, oh, that's not really something that you should do. It's dangerous. After all, he did leave the area, right? So it's too dangerous to go back and see him at the moment. So I remember distinctly, I was in the middle of my dissertation, had to figure out what to do, right? My plan was kind of, derailed. So I picked up some donut holes at Dunkin' Donuts on Michigan Avenue, and I went over to his sister's house, Guadalupe, who at the time had 3 young kids. And I sat there and I ate these donut holes with her and watched her kids run around. And they told me about what it was like for the breadwinner in the house to be removed. And she introduced me to her sister, who was Santiago's wife, and Santiago's wife had 2 kids. And once Santiago was deported, his wife took a bus down to the border and walked across the Texas-Mexico border to be with her husband, taking their U.S. citizen kids with them, right? And I talked to her as well. And slowly the picture that started to unfold was that the person we thought of who was the focus of deportation, when we look at deportation graphs, when we see deportation numbers, he was only a very minusculely small picture of everybody who was impacted by his removal. And that while often women are removed too, it's often men, and it's often women left behind caring for their children, for the family's children, and trying to decide what to do. Do we go back to Mexico, Guatemala, Central America? Do we stay here? What do we do when we had 2 drivers and we now have 1? What do we do when we had 2 incomes, or more often 1 income, and we now have none? So doing immigration research brings up, and following immigration news, brings up lots and lots of emotions, right? And I try to be honest with the emotions that fueled the work that I did, often because sometimes we're only allowed to present or show certain emotions, especially in faith-filled spaces, right? Now, do I think we need to pursue our immigration agendas with love and community? Absolutely. But y'all, sometimes the work that I do in deportation really pisses me off. It really hurts. It's heartbreaking, right? So at the end of, after I published this book, I was thinking we were going into, as many of us, a Hillary era. And while I knew deportation would continue, I thought perhaps we were going into a more humane moment. We all know now this is not what happened. And instead, we saw at the beginning of the first Trump administration an increase in deportation numbers, and specifically an increase in what I call large-scale worksite raids. And large-scale worksite raids, unfortunately, humble the numbers of deportations we see in home raids. And when I saw these raids, I'll talk a bit about them today, I was angry. I went into this book began pen to paper because I was angry at what I was seeing. These raids started happening in the summer of 2018. There were 6 such raids that happened throughout the country, and we visited those 6 sites. But what really pushed myself and my colleague, Nicole Novak, who wrote the foreword of the book, is that one of those raids was in Iowa, where she's from. One of the raids was in Texas, where I'm from. And as you notice, we see this with immigration now. Unfortunately, we see the same thing with school shootings. It's closer and closer to home every time as these systems expand. So what we did is we decided to go to the 6 sites of these worksite raids, and I'll list those for you. So Texas, Sumner, Texas, which is northern Texas, near Dallas, about an hour from Dallas, Bean Station, Tennessee, O'Neill, Nebraska, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and in our neighbor Sandusky and Salem, Ohio. These places have a lot of things in common. What are some of the things that come to mind that you think these places have in common? You may not know all 6, you might know 3. We at least know Sandusky and Salem, right? What are some things we think these places might have in common? This is the professor in me coming out. Meat processing, great. So the types of work that happen in these places, not always meat processing, but certainly the same type. Meat processing, cement plants, which precast cement, precast concrete, there we go, where you're pouring cement into large molds and shipping these things out, often work that takes place on large factory floors. Nursery work, as in plant nurseries, is also common. What else? What do we think? Landscaping, yeah. So there's different types of work that immigrants generally and that undocumented folks do. When we're thinking of where the work sites occur, yeah, kind of these big factory places. Landscaping is absolutely one of the types of work done most frequently. We see landscaping, working in hotels is one. And in the north, shoveling snow is often one. Roofing is another very popular. What about the six sites I listed? Anything else?
Smaller towns.
Yeah, they're really small towns.
And not a lot of protection.
Yeah, small towns, right? So we see sometimes not even 10,000 people. In Sandusky's case, it might be a little bit bigger, but it's very small towns. What else?
Vibrant Latino communities.
Vibrant Latino communities. Add one more adjective. What about the size of that Latino community?
Substantial.
No, actually very, very small, right? So we see small populations with very small Latino communities. Certainly tight-knit. Certainly, I like the word vibrant, right? But very small. Now, these things change the face of what you can do when someone is arrested, right? What can be done in LA, what can be done in Chicago is very different than what could be done in Bean Station or Mount Pleasant, right? In ways that I didn't fully understand at the time. So we visited these sites. We visited these 6 sites throughout the country, and we wanted to look, first of all, at what happens when these work site raids happen, and second of all, how communities respond. I like to remind folks, nobody lets their father, their uncle, their aunt, or their neighbor be removed without having at least an opinion about it, right? And nobody lets them, the majority of folks don't let them be removed without doing something about it. So we wanted to see, well, what is this doing? What is this thing that people are doing? And I'll tell you some of the stories that we saw throughout those towns, right? So in one of my favorite stories, we were actually in Ohio, and something ironic happens when folks who are undocumented get arrested, right? So in Michigan, like many other states, if you're undocumented and don't have a social security number, you can't get a driver's license, right? This isn't throughout the country, but it's in many states, again, including ours. So you're arrested, you're detained, and you're suddenly asked to do a lot more things, right? Go get your fingerprints, go get your passport, you're going to be deported, you need X, Y, and Z paperwork. So this is a pretty challenging catch-22 in which all these folks who can't drive are now being asked to drive. Now something else happens in these communities. Tell me one more or a couple more things when we think about them, right? What are some things that come to mind geographically? What's the landscape like? Yeah, really flat. Flat. You can see wide. Flat. Tell me about the roads when somewhere's flat.
Fast? I don't know.
What is it?
Fast?
Fast to get places, but you got to go far, right? So lots of highways and far from everything. So all of these cities are very, very far. So all of a sudden you have to go to a lot of places and you can't drive and everything is far, right? Everything is far. One of the attorneys that described this, right, is if you remember prevention through deterrence, if those of you have heard that phrase, you're shaking your head enthusiastically. Can I ask you to remind us what it is? Oh, see, you all didn't know. I'd put you on the spot.
It was a U.S. border policy where they wanted to make it so hard to enter the United States and such risk to your life that fewer people would try to cross the border without inspection.
Yeah, exactly. So the Sonoran Desert, right? We're thinking U.S., Arizona, Arizona, Texas, Arizona, Mexico. That was a great answer. Thank you. Prevention through deterrence, right? So we're aware that the U.S. uses the landscape and the geography to control immigration, right? This has been since the 90s. But this is the new way that the U.S. is using the landscape and geography to control immigration, is that they're detaining people in our neighborhoods, right, in our communities, that's very, very far from where? From Detroit, from, the capital, from, where's the major one in Ohio? Yeah, perhaps in Columbus, right? So folks have to drive multiple hours often to get to these places, and sometimes they will spend 6 hours, 8 hours a day. You can't work, right, when you're doing these things. So we're going into Ohio and we're thinking, well, what's the answer to this? And there's one more thing in Ohio that happens that we are aware of, sometimes happens here too. What do you think happens in a community that is small but has a very, very small Latino community. It's very evident whenever somebody is Latino and is driving or is out and about, right? But is what exactly? Driving while brown, driving while Hispanic, driving while Latino, yes, absolutely. And we had evidence that the Border Patrol was racial profiling folks who were in Ohio, right? There's a Border Patrol station in Ohio. All of this, certainly people talk about, but this is data's behind this. Racial profiling happens there. Does it happen elsewhere? I would argue yes. Many would argue yes. Do we have data for it? Sometimes, but in this case, we did, right? So we needed to get a lot of people to a lot of places that were very far. Let me tell you who I've worked with before. I've worked with lots of dissertating students or students who are volunteering. They're very, very flexible, but they're also, anybody work with them? Students, they're very, very busy, right? They're really busy. And they have like 10 minutes a day that you can they're super useful. And then they're doing other things. And I love working with students. They did not have 8-hour days available, right? Who else have I worked with? And I've worked with other folks, certainly in immigrant communities. Challenge, again, I don't want even volunteers to be racial profiled, right? Racially profiled. Who do you think were the organizers, the advocates who came? What's that?
Churches?
Churches? Yeah. Can you think of a particular group within churches that may be helpful here?
Quakers.
Quakers? Okay. Thinking outside of specific denominations.
Older folks?
Why?
Because they have more time.
They're retired. Yes. We had so many retirees who were like, oh, okay, let's sign up and drive folks wherever they needed to go. Now, why do I love this example, right? Well, I love it for a few reasons. One is because I've always said, you know, the line, the revolution will not be televised. Well, the revolution will actually be documented on spreadsheets. Like, the revolution is all about, like, our pushing back as organizers sometimes is not glamorous at all. It's sometimes just a lot of data and names all down pages and arranging what time people are going to do things. And that is what this organization did so well when they organized these drivers, right? Here's who needs to go where, who wants to sign up. And slowly this spread into churches, and all of these churches, all of these folks in churches would say, well, I have time through the week, I'm retired, I will do this, and I have a license, and I won't get racially profiled, right? So we saw that there was this combination, this group of people who would do this. And I like this example because sometimes the skills that we bring to our organizing, we may think they're one thing, but they actually need to be something else, right? Our best qualities that we bring to our organizing might not be that we could write books, right? Folks need something else. Sometimes they need people with driver's licenses and a lot of time. And that was a wonderful audience to have, and seeing that audience grow or seeing those volunteers grow was amazing. Another reason I like to bring this example up, right, is because when we think of resistance to deportation, deportation is often thought of as this particularly violent, which is accurate, and particularly intense, also accurate, and single moment type of action. All of those are accurate. All of those are what we're seeing on the news now, right? It's often portrayed as something, we'll say heavily masculine and heavily militarized, again, accurate. Consequently, the response to deportation is often presented in a very similar light, right? It's momentous, it's in your face, it's energetic, and all of this is accurate and all of this is appropriate. We love rallies, and I participate and you should participate, right? And we love the marches and we see them going on in Minneapolis, all appropriate. But the side of resistance that this often misses is that this is not sustainable over the long term, nor is it necessarily what is needed in all moments, right? What is needed is often slow and caring and takes a lot of time. And again, while I'm often fueled by anger to march with signs, I'm okay with that. But the slow, love-filled, compassion and empathy-filled side of resistance is also essential to keep us going over the long term. And this is a really good example of that, right? Folks who are driving people around were generally not very rageful at that moment. They generally took it in stride. They laughed a lot. They got to know the people they were with. But most of all, they met the folks that they needed with empathy and with consideration and kindness, right? I'll give you one more example of some of the strategies we see. We see a few different ones, and I want to give an example that I'll back up a little bit. One of my favorite things about public health is that our job really is to bring to the fore things that people have never considered but that once they hear them, they can never really shake. They're really obvious, right? So immigration worksite raids, right? These raids on these facilities like meatpacking plants happen during the day, generally during the hours of 8 to 3, when people are at work, right, by definition. Where are kids during the day, 8 to 3? Yeah, with very little exception. Exceptions being younger than 5 and exceptions being during summer, right? Always at school, every single time, right? Undeniable. So when worksite raids happen, who is it that have to tell the students that the parents who dropped them off might not be the parents who picked them up that day? Who has to tell them? Every single time, right? Teachers and administrators. And it's something that's easy to miss, but now that I've said it, right, I hope every single time that you see one of these raids, you think, oh, the educators are the ones who have to deal with this first. So one of the things we saw in Bean Station, Tennessee, so Bean Station is a meatpacking plant. Morristown, Tennessee is the city right next to it, and most folks who work in Bean Station live in Morristown, a very, very small Latino community in a majority white town, right? So this raid happens in Bean Station. There's 98 people who are arrested in this meatpacking plant. The next day of school, hundreds and hundreds of kids miss, right? Just don't go to school. And when you look at who misses, it's not a surprise, but it's mostly Latino students, right? So this brings up a few really challenging dynamics that these teachers now have to deal with. Do I have any teachers in here? We usually have some. Teachers or educators or professors. Great. What grades?
I taught second, third, and fourth grade.
Second, my heart goes out to you. I would rather teach college students any day than second graders. Thank you. And behind?
Kindergarten.
My partner taught kindergarten, and her job was much harder, I would say, than mine too, so God bless. But educators, you can imagine some of the dynamics you have in this, right? So 1/3 of your students are absent. On the very practical side, there's how do I teach what I plan to teach? Not the most important issue, but as a teacher, that's always in your head. How do I stick with my lesson plan, right? Again, not the most important. The second is how do I explain to the remaining students why their classmates are gone? You probably need to tell them something. And the third, and a little more complicated, is how do I explain to my white students why their Latino classmates are gone, right? Now, these are challenges I wouldn't wish on anyone, and I certainly wouldn't wish upon our nation's educators, who also have to deal with many of the other social issues that we dump on them, not the least of which is, of course, school shootings, right? So what we see is that many of these kids didn't go to school the next day. So what does this mean? It means the teachers respond, and it means the administrators and the principals respond. And how do they do so? In a few ways. One is that they now had to figure out who was going to pick those kids up, because many folks wouldn't be there to pick their kids up when they dropped them off. And they did this in a few ways. They also had to make sure that their bus drivers were able to drop the students off in homes that were not empty, right? So these administrators swung into action to make sure all of this would happen. But one of the things that really touched me the most, let's think about some of these schools. Where do you eat when you're in a low-income school and I guess I answered the question. When you're a low-income student, you know that you're able to eat in school, right? So one of the things that happens when you're not going to school is you're not able to eat. So these students are missing meals. So there's a way to make up for the missing meal. Of course, the parents can purchase this meal. But the parents, many of them just lost someone who was the primary provider, right? So if I were to characterize what was happening, we see this increase in just the most basic needs, this increase in the need for kids to eat. So what the administrators and the teachers did is they went door to door. And in some places, we saw this in Texas and we saw this in Tennessee, but it happened everywhere, to every single one of their absent students' houses and knocked on the door and brought them food, right? It's amazing that you could immobilize that many teachers, but it also doesn't surprise me. The teachers that I know, the teachers that you know, rarely does the role of the teacher stop at the academic learning of the students, right? So it also did, excuse me?
I said, absolutely.
Absolutely, right. It extends into often the rest of the students' lives, right? So we see these teachers reaching out and doing more. At the same time, we consider the fact that this should not be the burden of teachers, right? When we think about, so when I did my work in 2018, in 2019, the biggest worksite or statewide enforcement operation happened in Mississippi when chicken processing or meat processing plants were raided. 500 or 600, I forget, people were detained across the state, right? Now, there's a reporter who asked President Trump if he had told any of the teachers, told any of the social service agencies that these raids were going to happen. And he said, no, we can't warn anybody because then everyone will just leave the facility. So these other costs, these teacher costs, right? These are just acceptable. These are not his words. This is just an acceptable and necessary collateral of this type of enforcement, right? So when the question comes, does the administration know about this? Yes, absolutely. That the teachers bearing the burden of deportation is absolutely a function of the model that we have, right? That volunteers and that organizers are meant to bear the burden of what's happening right now. Now, I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I want to make a bit of a pivot, because I really want to make what I'm pointing out land here, right? And that is this really important? Where's the music coming from? It's like this epic swell. Like, all right, I'll wrap up. Let's move into the questions. I love it. Okay, as I was saying, as the strings build, is that this takes volunteers. This takes energy of all kinds. It takes angry energy, and it takes loving and caring and slow energy, right? It takes both. But at the same time, what the administration is doing is engaging in this deportation regime and letting the collateral fall to you all, right? We are going to remove people, and you all, we are going to take care of it. And we have to somehow navigate both those roles. Yes, I will absolutely feed that child. And no, I cannot stand for a policy that makes you have to feed that child, right? We have to think of both the policy while engaging with the impacts of it. From a public health perspective, right? This is like we have to deal with the machine that is causing the wound, and we have to suture the wound at the same time, right? Yes?
What about the impact on the employers? I mean, one day you've got 500 people working there, and the next day you don't.
A great question. Let me get to the employers in 1 second. Sure.
Can you repeat the question? Things that are happening out here in the audience don't go in here.
Sure.
Just a second.
Okay, I'll repeat the question in a second, yeah. So what I wanted to get at too, right, is that we have to figure we're working on this system is causing these wounds, and we're suturing the wounds at the same time, right? And this shows that we do have to think of both. And sometimes our role is to think of both. Sometimes we work with folks who are thinking of policy while we take care of those who are impacted by it. But one of the things I saw, and I'll wrap up with this, is that those folks who were doing the work would often have these moments that they would describe as so incredibly intense after these raids that they weren't able to do or say, or they weren't able to think beyond who they were helping for days, right? And then they would describe this moment where they were sitting there in quiet and they would just break down. And there was one woman who was going to law school. She was in Nebraska. She drove, I believe, 3 hours across the state after the raid to help this family, or to help the folks who were impacted. She said, I couldn't think for these 3 days until I finally just had to go to the bathroom. I took a restroom break, and I broke down. And I found myself throwing up in the bathroom because of the stress, right? Now, the reason I tell this story is because part of what became clear to me is that the administration was not only separating these families, not only trying to break families, but also setting up a system in which those who love immigrants will be broken too, right? The goal of the administration is absolutely to make me and to make you all collateral by making the harm impacted upon these people so grievous that we can only tolerate it for a short time, right? It's a heavy message, right? And it's one that makes us pause and think about how we do this work and how we make it sustainable, right? How far into the future we work. As the strings silence after the orchestral swelling, I want to take some questions. I don't know if I can take any online, but I'm happy to take some here. The first question was, what about employers? What do we do when all of these folks are removed from our economy? Certainly, the impacts of deportation can have strong impacts economy, both because we lose producers, right? We lose many of our folks who are working, but also because we lose consumers. immigrants contribute to our economy not only by producing things, but as going to restaurants next to you, as filling up their cars with gas right next to you, as owning homes, etc., right next to you, right? So thinking of the workers that we lost is important, but also thinking that your businesses have many customers, and now those customers are also gone. And it's not only deportation that impacts folks in the US, right? It's not only deportation that makes one person lose their role in the economy or be taken out of the economy. But when someone is gone, there's all of these related expenses. So none of this money is going into your economy. And none of these individuals in the family or even the community are leaving their homes to go about the community. So the employer question is a great one, and I always want to push you all to think of, we're also losing all of these contributors who are going to stores and who are just customers just like you right across all these other businesses. What other questions do we have? Do you want to moderate? I'm happy to do it, but you can certainly, either way.
You can do it.
Yeah.
Just the people have to use the microphone
Yeah.
so it's caught.
Okay, and I'm happy to repeat as well if it's not loud. Sure. Hi, Barry.
Going back to your initial, introduction, you mentioned that the workers don't have social security numbers. Why don't they have those, and what does it take to get a social security number?
Yeah, so undocumented folks don't have social security numbers and consequently can't get licenses in many states in the US. Why don't they have them, right? It isn't something that you get unless you go through a particular process that's mostly inaccessible for most folks who are undocumented in the US. There's a handful of ways folks can, but it's not accessible to the vast majority of folks whose children sit next to yours in class, who sit next to you in the church, who work next to us, who provide for our economy, right? One of the things to think about is that if a government wanted to create an exploitable class, we have tried to do so, and we did it successfully. I shouldn't say the word successfully. We've exploited many classes of folks. Going back throughout our history, right? We think first of folks from whom we stole this land. We think second of folks who were enslaved. We think next of folks who worked perhaps during World War II. While many US citizen men were at war, many immigrants came and were then deported, right? Now, if the US wanted to make an exploitable class now, we would have people who would not be allowed to drive unless we let them, and who would not be allowed to work unless we let them, and we could control at any time by deporting a small portion of them, right? And this is exactly what we see happening. We see so many workers continue to work because they know that at any moment that could be taken away. They can't complain about the conditions, they can't ask for health care, they can't ask for anything else. And to expand this even a little bit more, when many undocumented folks, when many immigrants are nearing the end of their lives, they may go back to their countries of birth when they pass away, right? This means many things, including that the healthcare costs are not borne by the US. So I think to Barry's question, right, there's many reasons why folks who are undocumented can't get social security numbers, but it's absolutely something that the US uses to benefit our economy by having an exploitable labor force. Yeah. Another question? Sure, Carol.
This is kind of not a question, but something that I saw on the news, and it's a couple-fold here. This one Latino lady was explaining to the interviewer that it's almost like how we all felt 4 years ago with COVID. Their kids can't go to school. Mama can't go to the grocery store. It's a good thing groceries deliver now. In fact, they are housebound because if ICE comes and knocks on the door, they don't have to answer the door. And they can all just kind of stay secluded in their house. And ICE can't do anything about that. And so the lady was talking about how our whole neighborhood are prisoners in their own home, which leads me to this, that on another show I heard a person talking about, was just telling David, that in their neighborhood, which is heavily Latino, they have spotters 24/7. And it's usually volunteers. It's usually non-Latino people. Because if it was Latino people on the corner as a spotter for ICE agents, then that would be counterproductive. So that's another way that, and a lot of the spotters are senior citizens who have the time to be able to just kind of hang around, and if they see ICE coming, they have a number they call, and then it fans out. So neighborhoods are developing their own system of safety within. And, you know, when you think about it, to have to live that way, none of us would want to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Carol raises two good points. So when I think about deportation, it's actually been easier to teach about post-pandemic for the examples that you gave, right? One of the other reasons it's very easy to teach about now is because when you think about early in the pandemic, right, when we shut our doors, I remember wiping my groceries. Who else did that? Yeah, I remember there was one very exciting day when we let our kids order something because we weren't even ordering boxes, you know, we weren't like, and why? Because we believed that the outcome was catastrophic, right? We believed the outcome of COVID was absolutely catastrophic, so we shifted our entire lives. It wasn't that it was likely, it was that it was unlikely but catastrophic, right? So I want to say that again. It wasn't based on the likelihood of it happening, it was based on the catastrophe that happened if it did, right? So now that we know that COVID, or we'll use another example of cold or flu, and I want to be clear that these are still serious illnesses that do cost American lives and health care money every year, but they don't necessarily shift our behaviors in the same way that early COVID did. Now why? It's because we do not believe it to be so severe, right? So one of the aspects of deportation that's easy for people to miss is that it's not always highly likely, but it is catastrophic, right? So you're changing your behavior not because there's a 50-50 chance it's gonna happen. It could be a 1 in 10,000 chance, but because if it happens, it's catastrophic. And when something's catastrophic, you change a lot of the things you do. Ghost town is how one place was described. We saw, shuttered blinds. You lock yourself in your mobile home. You don't leave. Shuttering the blinds and closing the windows actually really hit me, because it wasn't that you were just locked in a place. It was that you were locked in a place and you couldn't let anybody see you. Yeah, you couldn't see out, right? Sydney said. So, yeah, keep that in mind. When you hear about deportation, when you hear that, oh, it's only one agent in the county, it's not the odds of deportation that are changing people's behavior. It's the catastrophe. You'll do a lot to avoid something as catastrophic as being taken from your kids. Yeah. And then there was a question right behind. I'm sorry. I'll ask you next. Okay.
I am an immigrant. Well, actually, we're all immigrants. And the country is built on immigration. I mean, that's why it is so great. Because of the different people who came to work. And so this to me, I do wonder, I think to myself, well, I'm a citizen now, but they probably wouldn't even care. I wasn't born here.
But you're white.
And I'm white, but so far. I mean, that's good right now. But probably wouldn't be. I mean, it's going to keep moving. The thing I don't understand is why they haven't sorted out in their own heads that they need these people to run the country, to do the work in the country. It's not going to get done by itself.
Yeah, so I think these are good points. And Lois? Lois? To Lois's point, race has lots to do with it. Before I get to that, I want to take your first question head on. The statement was, we need these people, we need immigrants to run the country. So what would happen if we didn't have a group of people doing this type of work? Like, what would happen? Let's think about that.
Food chain would be interrupted.
Yeah, and so
Isn't
food
the
prices
idea
would go up.
that these immigrants are stealing our jobs, and so now we'll get employed?
Part of the idea, I think we can easily say that's not going to be the case, right? Okay.
But that's their crazy. Yeah.
So what else? So people aren't working these jobs. Food prices go up. What else?
A lack of caregivers.
Oh, there's a lack of caregivers. Yeah. Okay. And so, I think the question is, don't those in power understand that these things are going to happen? My answer would be yes, they do understand it well. Do we think they would be impacted would be my next question.
No, they won't be impacted.
Yeah. So I mean,
When they are impacted.
They don't care that the rest of us do.
I think one of the things that's kind of hard to admit is I think there is a belief in an expendable group of lower income folks across race, right? And this is more of what we're seeing. If food prices go up, that's okay for folks who are wealthy. If there's a lack of caregivers that we can afford, that's okay for folks who are wealthy too, right? If jobs need to be filled that aren't filled, if immigrant jobs even get filled by automation, right? This is going to impact a working class group of folks that I would argue many folks in power are willing to sacrifice for part of our country's racial purification campaign. It is not where I usually end on this note because it is a lot to unpack and a lot to think about. But I do want to say that, like, I think the administration knows a lot of the answers to these questions. No, people will suffer without immigrants. The economy will falter without immigrants. The people won't get caregiving without immigrants. And that's okay because the people in power, their lives won't change. You had a question?
This isn't a question. It's just something that I saw on the news that was just heartbreaking to me. A family of immigrants had a very successful food truck, and the parents were afraid to go to work. So these 3 young children took over the food truck, and I mean, they were young, and I just sat and watched the TV, and I thought, are you kidding me? You know, and to me, it was so sad. First of all, the children should be in school, and but they, you know, stood up and took care of the food truck. And it was really a story that got me.
Yeah, thank you. What was your name?
Cat.
Kat? So Kathy raises a great point. So in the research literature, this is called abrupt transitions to adulthood, right? There's a professor, Dr. Golash Boza at UC Merced, who talks about abrupt transitions to adulthood. And what this is that when an adult is detained, a family will shift in ways you all can imagine, right? So the older sister, often the older daughter, will become another mother figure, or the older son will become the father figure, including having to work. Many folks who are in college will drop out to work. Younger siblings will become caregivers for older siblings. I've seen folks who are not really shouldn't be driving now have to become drivers, right? But this is something that I think about often. We worked with a family that we love very dearly. Actually, their family in the book, so I can tell you more about them. If you remember when he started, Santiago was deported. Fernanda asked us to help her kids get back to Mexico, right, to visit their deported father. And, you know, one of the things that stuck with me is that the kids, when they were flying, this is later on after the book, but the older daughter was 13, the age of my younger son, and the younger son was about 10, right? And so now this 13-year-old girl had become, is now shepherding her younger brother across international borders in a language they don't speak, right? So this is just, again, this abrupt transition to adulthood. And part of what's, I want to say funny, but perhaps not, is that I knew about this idea of abrupt transition to adulthood because it's part of the literature that I've read, et cetera, and written about. But then seeing it with that 13-year-old younger girl really, really shook me up because I thought of those examples, yeah, you work before you should have to work. Yeah, you drive before you should have to drive. You make meals before you should have to make meals. But it's actually just so much more convoluted and emotional in real families. Like, you shouldn't be driving your kids to school. You're 15. You shouldn't be taking your brother across the border. You're 13. So going back to originally where we started, right, the removal of someone in a family unit inherently causes the reconstitution of that family unit. And it's often forced upon those who are younger to move up in maturity.
Also, just one more thing.
And the next.
The family was sending money back to their homeland that were very poor because of their successful business. They also suffered.
So just a bigger web of connections, right? We see that, I think that's absolutely the case, is that there's a contributor here in the U.S. is contributing to that family unit and often to the units back in countries of birth, all shifting, all adjusting. Sure.
So as we think about how we might organize our
resources, our hearts, our heads, our hands, in this community and in this region. Could you speak to other groups that we might reach out to, try to integrate with as we build capacity?
A great question, right? And an essential one, like, okay, what do we do about this? Like, what's the next step? A few things to keep in mind, right? And one is that there's no place that's too small to start. Like, if you've been doing this work since Bush Sr., or you've never done this work until today, that's okay. And it's our job, who've been doing it, not since Bush Sr., but since Obama, to find ways to integrate folks who may have even disagreed with us in the past, right? As we were talking about earlier, if we already had enough people to shift the base on immigration enforcement, we wouldn't need to grow our constituency, but we don't. So we need to be able to work with folks who may not see eye to eye with us, or who have not seen eye to eye with us prior to today, prior to this moment. So the first thing, there's nothing too small, and it's never too late to get started, right, is the first thing I want to say. The other is that I like to emphasize this point. No matter what you feel about any of these policies, you care about the repercussions, and you care about how they're done. What happened to Renee Nicole Good should not have been done, no matter what your beliefs are, right? No matter how you voted. We should not have that kind of occupying force in our communities, right? So there is a place to push back, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. In answer to your question, I think part of what's been challenging is converting this idea of like, this is probably statistically low in our community, right? So are there deportations happening? Yes. But it's not like they're happening in Minneapolis right now, where if we wanted to walk outside, we could find something to do. This is honestly challenging for organizers and challenging for churches and organizational groups, because what it means is that you kind of have to develop this long-term relationship with the immigrant community. And these long-term relationships are much harder to sustain than the highly angry and energetic, and again, appropriate ones that happen after these moments of violence. So one of the groups that I saw in Iowa who was the most successful when they worked with their immigrant communities was successful because they pivoted maybe about 4 or 5 times. They actually had an immigration, they actually had a book club. And if you need advice for books to read about immigration, I have multiple. But they had a book club, and this raid happened, and they just said, oh, we'll use the book club space. Why doesn't everybody just come and we'll start organizing like that, right? So I do think in communities like ours, this long-term commitment to immigrant communities, or even to learning about the issues, is the best way to start, as well as a willingness to pivot quickly when you hear of something happening in your community. There are other organizations in our community doing things as well. I wish we could work toward the driver's license again. We see that it's a bit challenging in this political moment to do so. I've worked with Wicker, who you see mentioned in the book, the Washington Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and MITA is the, I don't know the acronym, Migrant and Immigrant Rights Alliance, I don't know. But either way, so these 2 organizations tend to do urgent response and alerts for immigrant communities. But there's no shortage of opportunities to grow too. And there's no, there's, again, sometimes it starts just by, and you may have these groups, but it starts with facilitating them and being willing to pivot when something happens too. Sure.
I just want to make an observation about the kind of expanding, how the implications of the actions, the ICE actions, how they spread into an entire community. Because up in, as many of you probably have read in the news, in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, the schools have been shut down.
Yeah.
So now everybody's children are thrust back into a COVID-like environment.
To your point, they actually went virtual because just like the pandemic.
They've gone virtual quickly, and parents are finding roads blocked off as they're trying to get their kids to various things. So it's expanding to, well, that's all about the anticipatory action against the people, anticipating that something terrible is going to happen continually, and creating an environment of fear and mental illness. I mean, that's the other thing.
Yeah, and mental illness, or at least mental health issues, is not one that I even is not one that I even began with today. But certainly we see these issues, depression and anxiety being most among them. Right. I'll share one quick story. We think about how we talk about these events, right? And we think, especially in the first case, like this was a highly militarized event in which agents kicked in the door and took the men out of this facility. And I often got asked the question about, did these people have PTSD, right? And my quick answer would be yes. We did the research and looked at the interviews, and we looked at what folks said and how that compared to PTSD diagnoses, right? And we think of things like being unable to sleep. And another frequent one, frankly, is I thought I was going to die, or I thought I was going to see someone get killed. And you see that all the time, right? You see all the time. Folks don't leave their community because they're asked nicely. They don't leave their children. We do not leave our children because we're asked, right? There is usually this threat or this feeling of death that happens. But one of the realities that comes up is that PTSD diagnosis comes when your body's alertness and awareness does not let you function in normal life. So we think of the diagnosis came from folks coming back after war and being unable to integrate. But when we speak to folks who are living in this deportation environment, the trait is quite clear. Like, I can be overly alert, hypervigilant, my cortisol system can run all day long and it can shorten my lifespan, or I cannot pay attention and I can be deported, right? So part of what happens is that there's no post to the deportation regime right now. Like, there's no post, so we can't say that it's PTSD because all of these behaviors are appropriately adaptive. You were not diagnosed while you were in Vietnam with PTSD when those were adaptive behaviors. And for many folks who are undocumented here, there's continue to be adaptive behaviors.
Well, this will have to be the last question.
I'm just thinking through the cost to communities at the state and local levels of losing employees from, as Barbara answered the question. Has there been any studies from academia or anywhere on what is the cost of losing workers? What is the cost to our economy? They're paying taxes like everyone in this room. That is one thing this administration understands. They tried to reduce the cost of our various agencies in the federal government. Is there any way of pushing back through obtaining the cost of what it's all of these immigrants being deported and what it's costing our community and public health and medical help and all the other things that you can go on a long list of it.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Can we put the economic numbers front and center, right? And I think in answer to your question, yes, we know it will be more expensive. Yes, we know these jobs are being lost, right? Yes, we know it's an impact on our community. The next question is thus, if the politicians who know these things continue to do so, why are they doing so, right? So first we say, like, well, do they know that they're going to be losing a lot of money? Yes. So then why do they continue to do so? And how do they cover that they know this is the reality? One of the ways that they cover it is absolutely through fear-mongering, which we see now. And we see most fear-mongering we saw directed at the Somali community, right? We saw the Somali community. I even hate reminding folks of this. The president said they eat pets, right? And this is all things we either know to be blatantly false, or the other thing we see is it's happened once and it becomes the whole story. And whereas the other fear-mongering is certainly directed at Venezuelan immigrants, right? And we now see the longer arc of that story, right? So, I think in answer to the question, does the administration know they're losing a lot of money through immigration? Absolutely. How do they still maintain public support? They do a lot of fear-mongering, and thus they get to enforce this more. Is there ways to have policies so more immigrants get Social Security numbers? Sure. This could be our immigration policy agenda. Does the administration do it? No. Why not? We have a large exploitable workforce now, right? So sometimes these questions that are really good points are answerable, and then the next question is what we have to ask ourselves. If the administration knows, how do they cover it, and what are they doing it for? And these are some of the harder questions, because then we have to confront this next level of realities. Oh, there is this enormous fissure that is being developed between immigrant communities, communities of color, politicians, and our white community, right? And we have to choose to look at those narratives, to look at them critically, to counter them, and to opt out from listening to them, and to bring them up to folks who are also hearing them too. So thank you very much. I'm honored to share the morning with you all. I want to thank everybody else who joins us online. I'll just get in front of the camera to wave to you. Thank you for those folks who joined us online or are seeing this recording later too. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
We have, this is about as modest a gift as we can get. But there is something interesting about the collectivity in the pot and the flower with a lot of different communal companions on there to bring joy into a life.
And it reminds me of Texas, Arizona.
Texas, there you go, the succulents.
Yes,
the succulents.
absolutely.
Thank you so much, and thank everybody, and goodbye to people online, and come back for the next 2 weeks. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
We were saying how
How could you say that for sure?
How are you, my friend? All right. Yeah, she will do that. Across the parking lot. She does. Speaking of which, I have something for you. I buy them and then bring them. So, 20, 29. And I can Venmo or cash, it's fine. Thank you for your question.